Let me say a pleasant evening to you, my family and friends out there who will be joining me for this another session of our live study as we continue to have a mini study series, commentary, exposition, etc. on key Bible passages, more specifically where we're at now in the New Testament that deals with the matter of diet, that is a Christian's relation to the Old Testament dietary food rules. I'm happy to know that quite a lot of you have been really enjoying the expositions I've been doing so far on the previous passages that we did. We've done Romans 14 already. We've done Acts chapter 15, chapter 10, Mark chapter 7, as well as the Old Testament context, and then we transitioned into the New Testament. And so I'm happy to know that, it has been wonderful for many of you. You find them very useful and valuable. You find them in accordance with what Scripture teaches, with Christian liberty, and you will allow these principles to be instructive with regards to your choice of food, whether for medical reasons, for dietary purposes, for health purposes, etc. And I do hope you see that Christians are not under any sort of legalistic bondage regarding these practices, and we ourselves should not make these as mandatory requirements for the other Christians as well. So we can see very clearly that these are non-salvific matters. These are issues that takes into account each and everyone's individual conviction, and we are free to eat, free to not eat. Your salvation is not involved. Your spirituality is not affected nor determined by these things. And cultures, for a large part, determine quite a lot what we eat. And we ought to understand that whatever we eat is to be done to God's glory, and we are free to partake. So now we are on 1 Corinthians chapters 8 and 10. And the reason I will do both of them in one session tonight is because they are both very short passages that deal with this issue, as well as the fact that it is to the Corinthian church that Paul wrote this issue, is dealing with the same thing, and the context is the same. So that is why I'm just doing it as one sit-in to make it much more easy for you and more time saving. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, we see where Paul outlines, similar to Romans 14, how we should relate to food sacrificed to idols and also to fellow believers who may have weak scruples. Now, when you read Corinthians, you see clearly that the Corinthian church was a church that was troubled by many things. It was a church rife with immorality. Corinth was the hotbed of immorality in the time of the New Testament. And as you read throughout the passage, the various chapters into 2 Corinthians, you see a lot of these issues. They had issues with food sacrificed to idols, as we are going to study. They had issues with sexual immorality, with incest, with giving. They had issues with the Lord's Supper, with understanding that the church, is the temple of God and the Spirit dwell in them. The resurrection, they had issues with that in chapter 10. They had issues with sectarianism or divisiveness in the church, where some persons were saying, hey, I'm for Peter, another I'm for Apollos, another I'm for Paul. So there was a lot of castes and factions in the Corinthian church. They had a lot of challenges, and they wrote certain questions to Paul regarding these issues they were facing, so that he could provide the apostolic authority, apostolic teaching and practices that they should hold on to regarding these matters. And so after dealing in chapter 7 with the issue of marriage and divorce and that kind of thing, he says, now concerning things sacrificed to idols. So they had written to him about this matter. When Paul introduces a subject matter like this, it simply shows that they had sent him a question regarding it, and now he's giving his apostolic authoritative command or instructions regarding these issues that he expects them to follow as the church that he actually birthed. And so he says, now concerning the things sacrificed unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge. So all of us have, he's talking to them, but I'm simultaneously making application to us today. We all have knowledge. Knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. So he states now regarding idols and the things that are sacrificed to them, we all have some form of knowledge regarding these things. We are very knowledgeable. He says knowledge makes one arrogant, and this is true. I myself have to keep reminding myself that I need to be humble with, the knowledge and the gifts God has given me, because sometimes it can make you arrogant, especially when you meet a lot of people who you are more educated than, and they are very dogmatic and fanatical, and they want to war with you regarding, their uneducated opinion. So sometimes it does make you somewhat arrogant, but we have to remember that we need to be humble when we are dealing even with those set of people and the knowledge that God has given us, that we have accrued through much study and employing ourselves to the books and research and all of that. It is not for us to be arrogant about, but to lovingly edify others. And so that is why with a lot of my teaching and focus, I've decided to take a different focus and, a different method, because a lot of these, especially Adventist laymen and fanatics that I deal with, they kind of make you draw that arrogant aspect. But I realize it's not a good spirit that I want to have or continue with. And so I've started to take a different approach with these things, because arrogance is not a good godly trait that anyone should seek to engender and foster as part of their personality and character. So while knowledge is there to, make you arrogant, which you shouldn't be, we should focus on love that edifies. And again, we can see how this ties in with Romans 14 as to, in everything we should seek to be Christ-like and loving, and to correct people in love, and to help them to know better and understand better these truths of the Word of God, rather than to arrogantly hammer them down with our knowledge. If anyone supposes that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know. So right there, this is a humbling statement. No matter how much knowledge you will attain, no matter how much degrees you will amass in this life, or how much prizes you will gain and accolades that will be showered on you, yet the level of knowledge you have is a small dot in comparison to the vast wealth of knowledge that is still out there that you are clueless about, you don't know. And again, this is why we ought to be humble with what we know. We can never be dogmatic and arrogant with regards to what we have as the exclusive absolute truth, and we box aside and we don't want to hear anything else anyone has to say. We have to be humble about that, because while we may have sufficient, or enough knowledge to hold us in a specific area for a specific time, there are so many things that we have no clue about. We just don't know, and we will never fathom their depths. But if anyone loves God, he is known by him. So Paul says here, don't focus on the plethora of knowledge that you have regarding to food sacrifice to idols or what's not, or the various other things, knowledge that you will amass in this life regarding your specific field or whatever. But we need to focus on loving God. We love him because he first loved us, as 1 John, I think it's chapter 4, puts it. And when we love God, we know that we are known by him. That is, we have a personal relationship and connection with him. So that is the focus. So our knowledge, our experiences, and what have you in life, all of that means nothing if there's no love for God. All of that means nothing if there's no love for our fellow man and no desire to lovingly edify them. So again, we should not be puffed up and high-minded with our attainments in life, whether intellectually or materialistically, but we should seek to have that consistent relationship with God, and we should seek to have love for each other and to edify each other. So Paul continues, therefore, concerning the eating of things sacrificed to idols, we know that there's no such thing as an idol in the world, and that there is no God but one. So he's not denying the existence of carved images as idols, etc. What he's actually saying here is they have no real existence. In other words, you can make all these statues to whatever God that you want to worship and all these figments of your imagination. We know, in fact, that in essence, those gods don't exist. So you could make idols to Buddha, to Confucius, or whatever kind of thing you want, deify, any kind, and we know the world has a plethora of gods. Paul says they have no real tangible existence. They are just figments of people's imaginations. There's a psalm, I think it's Psalm 86, where David says somewhere there that all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. So they're just a figment of people's imaginations that they have carved out in their likeness, as Romans chapter 1 puts it, and they are worshiping and serving the creatures and creation rather than the one true and living God. So Paul says these things they are sacrificing to idols. The idols have no real existence. The idols are not going to taste the food. They're not going to smell the food. They can't do you good or bad, just like the case with Elijah in 1 Kings, I think is 18, on the Mount Carmel experience, where he was mocking the Baals and the gods of the Canaanites and the other people around him, when they weren't showing up on time. So they have no real existence. And there's only one God. He is the true and living God, the God that he taught them about and that he traveled the known world at that time, preaching to people, as Acts chapter 17 puts it, to turn from these vain idols to serve the true and living God. So for even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and we exist for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through him. So Paul says, yes, I recognize that a lot of these idols exist. There are many called gods and lords and a pantheon of deities in the world. But we know for sure that they have no real existence. There's only one God, and that is the Father. There's only one Lord, that's Jesus Christ, and it is to him and by him we live, we exist. So in essence, Paul is saying, while these people are sacrificing things to idols, it is foolishness. They have no real existential value and existence to them. There's only one true God, as Acts 17 puts it, verse 28, in whom we live and move and have our being. These idols cannot impart life. They cannot save life. They can't do anything. They are just dumb things as stone and wood and what have you. They have no real tangible existence. So he's setting this now as the base for what he's about to explain. However, not all men have this knowledge. I mean, he said everyone should know that wood, stone, and what have you, they are not gods. Though people assign deity attributes to them, they're not really gods. There's only one true and living God. But he says not everyone has this understanding. But some, being accustomed to the idol until now, eat food as if it were sacrificed to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So when the food was offered to the idol, and some who don't have that knowledge that they are just mere dead, dumb idols, they eat the food as if it was offered to the idol, and their conscience being weak, so it's defiled. They commit sin because they're not doing that which is of faith, as we saw in Romans chapter 14, verse 23. But food, verse 8 says, will not commend us to God. We are neither the worse if we do not eat, nor the better if we do eat. So here Paul is making a strong statement that if you eat the food sacrificed to the idol, or you don't eat it, or whatever kind of food, it will never commend you to God. It will never, like when we want to do something or, go to university or want something done, get a job, we go get a letter of recommendation from some respectable person in society or whatever. And that letter serve to, give us graces and favor in the eyes of, or before the individual was seeking to impress or to say, well, we are who we say we are capable of doing what we say we can do. Well, this is what Paul is talking about. The food that is eaten, it cannot commend us to God. We are no better off if we eat or no worse off if we don't eat. Food, in essence, does not in any shape or form affect or determine our standing with God. Now, quite a number of people, have it that food affect and determine your morality, and meat arouses your animal passions and it make you more a sexual beast and all sorts of things, and you're incapable of discerning truth, etc., because the mind is clogged by heavy meat eating and that kind of thing. That is nonsense. This passage is making it clear that food does not get to that moral level. It does not reach there. And we saw it in Mark chapter 7 where Jesus says, what you eat does not affect your spirit. It don't affect the core of who you are. It just go through your digestive tract. It's defecated and that's it. It has no moral value to it. It don't determine if you're a good person or you're a bad person. For example, some people have it that if you're a vegetarian, you should be more mild-tempered, more humane, more loving, more kind, and more spiritual. But it is absurdity because, and you could do your historical research, Hitler was a strict vegetarian. He did not smoke tobacco. He did not drink alcohol. He did not eat meat. He was a strict vegetarian. Yet Hitler is one of the most evil men that have ever lived. So to say that what you eat determine your moral fiber and determine the course of your life and your spirituality is absolute nonsense. If that was true, then we would have expected Hitler to be a saint, next to Jesus Christ or some other holy, godly person. But Hitler was one mad individual and a very angry and violent man who sought to exterminate Jews and blacks and the pygmies, etc., and various other people groups in Germany and Europe at that time. So what we eat, not only does it not affect our spirituality and determine our spirituality, but it does not commend us before God. It don't make us better. It don't make us worse. The food we eat has nothing to do with our salvation, whether or not it's offered unto idol or it's not offered unto any idol. So Paul says, but take care that this liberty of yours do not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. So the fact that it don't matter whether you eat or not, and if you choose to eat because idols are stupid things, Paul says you're free to do so, but don't let your liberty become a stumbling block to those who are weak in the faith. And the weak here, that's what he's talking about. Just like how we had seen in Romans chapter 14 last night, the weak in the faith abstained from eating all things. He only ate vegetables, while the strong one ate everything. And I have you can check YouTube where I uploaded the study on that, as well as my page where you can look back over it to see what we had discussed. So we must ensure that while we are free to eat or not to eat, others are not offended by what we choose to eat. When we're in their presence, in the privacy of our homes, that's fine, they're not there or whatever. But in their presence, in the church body, we should be very cautious of that. For if someone sees you who have knowledge, dining in an idol's temple, will not his conscience, if he is weak, be strengthened to eat things sacrificed to idols? So he's weak. He don't have the knowledge and understanding that an idol has no real existence. So he sees me, for example, who's very educated in these things, and I'm dining in an idol's temple. His weak conscience is going to think I'm paying homage to that idol. Therefore, he's going to be strengthened in his weakness to go and eat those things sacrificed to the idols as paying homage to the idol too. This is what Paul's saying here. So we have to be careful not to allow that to happen. For through your knowledge, he who is weak is ruined, the brother for whom Christ died. So my liberty now, if I'm flaunting it, can become a source of the destruction of somebody else. My liberty to drink wine or alcoholic beverages, if I'm not cautious, can be the cause of causing somebody to stumble. And that is why Paul advised for not doing certain things in front of them to be that sort of a thing for them. So we must be careful not to cause them to commit sin and to be ruined. I mean, I can drink and nothing happens to me, but somebody might predispose to alcoholism and they might be a Christian, or they might not be so strong and don't know how to temper, to hold their glass or whatever, hold their liquor, as we would say, and they become drunkards and wrecks and become addicts to it. So I should not flaunt that liberty to drink or to eat whatever in front of them, lest their immaturity and weakness in the faith cause them to go overboard and eventually commit sin. So in verse 13, Paul says, verse 12 rather, and so by sinning against the brethren and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Again, this is a profound principle. The way I treat them is not loving, therefore I'm sinning against Christ. It's similar to the parable that Jesus spoke, in Matthew 25. In the last day, many will say to him, Lord, have we not done this, that, and the other? And he said, hey, if you didn't do it to the least of my brethren, you didn't do it to me. And he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. And when he was hungry, they fed him and they clothed him and what have you. And they have no idea they were doing this to him. But he says, as you do this to fellow humanity, you do it to me. You're showing love for me. So too, when you neglect to be loving, to be courteous, to be kind and considerate of others, and to be Christian and uplifting to them, you are doing the same thing to Christ, and you're sinning against Christ. So Paul says then, keeping this in mind, therefore, if food causes my brother to stumble, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause my brother to stumble. So if I know I'm eating something in front of a weaker brother or sister that will cause them to stumble, that will cause them to attribute worship to a false deity, I should not do it, because that will cause them to stumble. So if you know drinking certain things in front of them, eating certain things in front of them is going to cause problem for them, don't do it in front of them. Don't be a stumbling block to them. Don't let your liberty become something that is considered evil and to cause others to fall. So this is where Paul concludes regarding that in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Now we jump to chapter 10, verses 23 to 30, where he's discussing the same thing and giving a different take, and he highlights more principles for us as Christians to live by. After discussing the Lord's Supper, and that they ought to flee from idolatry and what have you, and the correct ways and incorrect ways of taking the Lord's Supper, he says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. So while I'm at liberty to eat or not to eat, it's lawful, but it doesn't mean that it will benefit me or it's going to benefit others. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. So while I may be free to do certain things, I must take into consideration that how this will affect other believers. How will this affect the body of Christ? And again, I'm speaking in the context of you're in their presence, because in your private home, it wouldn't matter, if you and your wife are on the same page or whatever, and your family members who live with you, it wouldn't matter. But he's speaking to the church body, so we have to keep that in mind, that he's addressing the church body who would be meeting and worshiping together. So he says, let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. So don't be selfish and just trying to build yourself and you strengthen yourself and you're holy by yourself. Seek the good of your neighbor in all things. And then we get to the solid principle regarding now what to eat, what not to eat, etc. In verse 25, he says, eat anything that is sold in the meat market without asking questions for conscience sake. This is what my friend Lauriston liked to call a dietary don't ask, don't tell. And the reason for this is this here is packed, and I need to break this down a bit. Many Hebrew Israelites, Adventists, Armstrongites, and Hebrew Roots movements, they love to twist up these passages to uphold the Old Testament law as the ultimate rule and standard for Christians regarding the dietary rules, And so they reinterpret all of these passages to fit into the Old Testament paradigm rather than allowing the full revelation of God in Christ that's revealed in the New Testament to be the final authoritative word. And so they go at length to say, well, this is talking about food offered unto idols, so it doesn't mean anything. Well, let me give you the historical context. My friend Larry Dean, who's one of the authors of Lion for God with us, he has been to Greece. He lived there for about 6 months to a year, and he went to the city of Corinth, the site, everything, and had all history broke down and explained to him all the sites he went. And it's mind-boggling what he shared with us that he saw, as well as if you do read some good commentaries on this, you will get a lot of things come into light too. When Paul says here, eat anything that is sold in the meat market without raising any question, he was literally telling the Corinthians to eat pork. Let me explain. Like I said before, Hebrews and legalists, they like to say, well, this is referring to the clean foods of Leviticus 11 and not to the unclean foods. Now, that's a huge red flag and wild abandoned eisegesis, and here's why. Gentiles, unlike Jews, offered anything and everything to their idols. They weren't particular like Jews to only offer the clean animals as was stipulated by the law. In any Gentile city you went to, any Gentile historical literature you read, you will see that they offered anything and everything to their deities, right? They offered both clean foods and unclean foods of Leviticus 11 to their pagan deities. And the city of Corinth here was prominent for pork. Yes, pig was a huge economic commodity in Corinth. It spanned from the 2nd century BC, when the Greek king Antiochus, when he defiled the Jewish temple by offering pig on the altar, etc., as a means of defiling the temple. They consistently offered pork to their idols. When Larry Dean went to Corinth and went around these sites, what he saw was that all the temples they have dedicated to the various deities, and you could do your own research on this, the temple of the deity would be situated at a place, and just about 2 to 3 or 4 feet, just a stone throw away, you would have the meat market. And what they used to do is, after they sacrifice the various food, whether clean or unclean animal, to their deity, and they would have taken the portion out as the libation, they would take the carcass or the meat of that animal right beside the temple of that deity to the meat market. And so, for example, you had the temple of Aphrodite. You had the temple, and right beside the temple was the slaughterhouse, the meat market where you can go and you just buy that food or whatever right after. He even documented how the streets of the city of Corinth ran red straight through with the blood of pigs. They offered at least, anyway, I think he was saying from 10 to 15,000 pigs just about every day. People used to actually come from the various parts of the world for good fortune, go to Corinth for their temple prostitutes, as well as to buy these animals to offer to their deities for safe travel, good fortune, and what have you. So when Paul says here, eat anything that is sold in the meat market, not only does anything, the adjective here, pan, is contextually all-inclusive, but he's also talking about pork. He been to Corinth before, and he know how it's situated. And so he is literally telling them, hey, I know the pork was sacrificed to the idol and then taken to the marketplace. It's okay to have that. So those who like to say that this only referring to clean meats, the historical context will not support that. Like I say, Greeks, they love their pork to this day. They love their pork. They hated circumcision, and that is why it was so hard for the Jews to evangelize Greeks. It was very hard, only a handful, even to this day. There are various churches, who have been there, Sabbatarian, anti-pork churches, and they have a handful of members in a country of about 20 million people, because Greeks love their pork. They don't like circumcision and these stringent rules and regulations. And so right after the food was sacrificed to the idols, whether clean or unclean food, It was taken right beside the temple to the slaughterhouse, the meat market, where it could be sold to be eaten. And Paul says here, eat anything that is sold in the meat market without asking any questions for your conscience sake. Hey, it don't matter. You're strong, your conscience are free. It just doesn't matter. We had already seen in chapter 8, idols have no real existence. They're just figments of the imagination. That is why he's able to give this instruction to the church. Then in verse 26, he gives the reason for that. For the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. So the food that was sacrificed to that dumb idol, that was sold in the meat market that you're able to eat, you're able to do so because God owns everything. Everything that's in it was created by him, and he has created these creatures when he gave the command in Genesis chapter 9 for man to eat all things. So these things no way will commend you or disapprove you before God. Therefore, eat whatever is sold in the meat markets. In verse 27, he says, now if one of the unbelievers invites you and you want to go, so they invite you to a dinner at their house, eat anything that is set before you without asking questions for conscience sake. So now he's instructing him how to relate to unbelievers. Jesus had given the same instruction in Matthew chapter 10. When you go to a house and they receive you, the Prince of Peace is there, eat whatever is said before you. That's what he said to the disciples. Don't ask them any questions. The people welcome you, accept their hospitality, show them that you are friendly, you have something good to offer in return, you value and respect them, do so. You have to understand, in the ancient world, people who did not eat together weren't friends. You know, people who don't eat together seldom become friends, as the common adage is, and it's true. And in the ancient world, hospitality was a big thing. And so if somebody brought you to their house, welcomed you to their home, and they were taking care of you, and what they gave you rejected, you were actually, as we say today, you were dissing that person. You know, you were kind of like dehumanizing, and it was a huge disrespect to that person. So Paul says, for the unbelievers, so all the pagans who were around the church, if an unbeliever happened to invite you to his house for dinner as a believer, whatever they said before you, eat it. So if they said shrimp, crab, lobster, conch, pork, dog, and I'm keeping it real. You when you visit Asian countries, this is what they eat. Don't expect them to hand you lamb chops and turkey and chicken and that kind of thing, really. If where they are, majority of what they eat are these things. You go to various parts of the world and tribes around the world, they eat frogs, snakes, alligator, and all of these things. And Paul is saying here, repeating the same thing that Jesus said, whatever they set before you, eat it. Because what matters most is not your peculiar scruples, but it's about accepting this person's hospitality and being mature enough to accept that entering wedge to preach to them the gospel. What you eat is just going to come out as fecal matter anyway. It's excrement. It just doesn't matter. So whatever they set before you, eat it for conscience sake. Your conscience is free. You're liberated. It's not condemned. Eat whatever they give you. But, he says, if anyone says to you, this meat is sacrificed to idols, that is the unbeliever. If he says this is sacrificed to idols, don't eat it. Why don't eat it? For the conscience of the one who has informed you, and for conscience sake. So now, because he's an unbeliever, he's going to have the impression that you are worshiping the same idol. And so you want to show him that you don't bow down to this idol, you don't partake of the lifestyle of this idol. So he says, don't eat it, to not give the false impression that you are a pagan just like him. This is what he means, because he don't know better. And your conscience would also tell you that this is what he would think, and so you now should abstain from it. I mean, not your own conscience, but the other man's. So you're abstaining as a means of pricking his conscience. You back away to show him, hey, I don't pay homage to these pagan gods. I serve the true and living God, and this is why I won't eat this. It's not because I can't. It's because of the spiritual significance that is behind what you just told me, that this was sacrificed to the idol and this is in honor of your idol. So this is what Paul is trying to say here, and even the reason he's given for you to abstain when they tell you it's sacrifice to an idol is for evangelistic purposes, to begin to show him now the futility of his God and point them to the true and living God who made the heavens and earth and who gives life to all. For why is my freedom judged by another's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I slandered concerning that for which I give thanks? So obviously, the unbeliever would have slandered or misinterpreted the action of the believer. And so Paul says, if he says to you, this is sacrificed to an idol, don't eat it. But if he doesn't say anything, whatever it is, just eat it. If you want to buy something, go to the meat market and buy, because an idol is foolishness. They have no real existence. Eat your pork, eat your goat, eat your mutton, eat whatever that is sold in the meat market. And trust me, I've watched a lot of documentaries and video presentations on this. Just go on and look up the Asian meat markets. You will see that these people meat market, they literally have almost everything imaginable. I mean, you talk about from worms to this to bugs and to that, they eat everything. And the interesting thing is that before the 1970s, I think, despite they are eating all of these things, because we like to say, well, oh, it's unhealthy and it's going to kill you quick and whatever. That is not true, because these people have been eating these things for millennia and they don't experience a quarter of the cardiovascular disease that we experience in the Western world. They didn't have obesity and all of these things, yet they eat snakes, they eat dogs, they eat rats, they eat all sorts of things. It is in the 70s and 80s when fast foods were introduced to East Asian countries and they became large consumers of them, that a lot of diseases, we see happening among them rapidly. But if you look at the tribes, people of the Amazon, and Africa, and various people in the Middle East, these people eat everything, literally. They eat anything and everything, and they do not. They live long. They live long. The Okinawans of Japan, one of their main food is pork, and these people live long. They don't have cardiovascular diseases and all of these different types of stuff that plague us today, because these things are in their natural state. For example, let me put it this way. A hyena in its natural state is much more healthier than the GMO chickens that the Western world consumes so much. A snake in its natural state is much healthier than the cows and the turkeys that are grown in the farms that we have today. Check the science for yourself. Why is that? Because the ones in our Western culture, they are pumped with a lot of pesticides, insecticides, hormones, and chemicals, and what have you, that they become unhealthy. But the ones in their natural environment, like even the ones that we call scavengers that clean the earth, their body is wired and manufactured that way to naturally get rid of all the poison and the filth or whatever that's in their systems. And also when they are cooked and prepared properly, they are rid of these things. Whereas the ones we are getting pumped with all those hormones and those various things, they become unhealthy and they kill us fast. So we scorn their culture because they eat what we wouldn't eat, but at the same time, what we call clean food, healthy food, is actually killing us quicker than those things are having any sort of effect on them. So the whole scorning people because of their cultural diet and, they eat different from us, that don't bother now. It don't fly when you actually check the facts and you check the science behind it, and the fact that these people are disconnected from our modern lifestyle and industry or whatever else have you, and they don't have the various diseases that plague us, yet they are eating snake, anaconda and cobra, and they drain out the toxins out of them, and frogs, and they eat all of these things as their cultural diets, and they do not have these diseases that harm so many of us today. So to scorn them based on what they're eating and that's just working off emotions. It doesn't bother an eye, And many of us, if push come to shove and we are trapped in those various jungles or situations, I'm sure to survive, we would eat those things too. And we will see that they don't do anything to us once we prepare them properly. So Paul laid out the wonderful principle here. Whatever is sold in the meat market, eat it. Anything that is set before you, eat it. So if you visit Asia and, your conscience is strong, Whatever's in the meat market, go buy it. There are various, as I say, various countries that I've checked, and I mean, and they prepare a variety of things. And if you check these people, they are healthy. These people are strong. I see 60 and 70-year-olds on the various documentaries that I watch. These people are still working strong and healthy and can run and do all sorts of things. Again, check these things out for yourselves. I'm not just trying to pass off any wild view here. Check these things out for yourselves and you see what I'm talking about, and compare that now to somebody who lives in our Western world of the same age, who's eating chicken and vegetables and what have you, and look how much diseases we have. Why? Because of the way these things are prepared in their natural state and prepared properly. Nothing is wrong with these kind of foods. So we should not scorn these people. If we go by them and this is what they have to offer, they welcome us into their home, we should have the courtesy, the decency to accept what they give, pray over it, and eat it. If we go to their country to minister or vacation or whatever, and we don't see our Western foods that we used to, and we see what they have and we want to try it, hey, buy it. It's okay. That's what scripture is saying here. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Everything belongs to him. Nothing belongs to the devil or other idols or what people like to try say. So whatever you eat, give thanks for it. Have fun. Enjoy it. But if they are ascribing it to the worship of an idol, he says, hey, don't accept it, because you don't want him to think you're worshiping that idol. So his conscience can be pricked, and he can possibly ask questions why you refuse, and you can evangelize him and tell him the truth of the true and living God. Then in verse 31 he says, whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Again, a lot of people like to proof text this to say, well, this is me, you should abstain from things because of this text. No, contextually this text is telling you, when you eat anything that is bought in a meat market, when you eat anything that is set before you by anyone, verse 27, whatever you eat or drink, do it to God's glory. Or if you choose to abstain because the person informed you was offered unto idol, do it to God's glory. So if you're going to eat this sort of food, do it to God's glory. If you're going to drink this beverage, do it to God's glory. This is what Paul is saying. So whether you eat, whether you abstain, whatever else that you do in life, do it to God's glory. Give no offense either to the Jews. Now, what do you mean give no offense to the Jews? You'd go by the Jew, and they would prepare perhaps their kosher food that you don't like or never eaten. Eat what they said before you. And also, the Jew don't eat certain things, and he's allowed to not eat certain things. Don't push certain things on him or deliberately rub certain things in his face, as Acts chapter 15 had, stipulated for Gentiles. Abstain from things strangled and from blood and things sacrificed to idols, to not give offense to Jews, because the Jews would still be following their Old Testament rules. So don't give any offense to them, and also to the Greeks. How would you give offense to the Greeks? Like I said, do your research. Greeks were large consumers of pork. I can even post you the passage in First Maccabees, from Antiochus' time, and various other historical documents, where Greeks, they love their pork and they love all these delicacies. You go by them, they invite you to their place. Would have said before you, eat it. If you don't eat it, you would give offense to them. Only if they tell you this is sacrificed to Zeus or whatever fanciful god, then you have the right to abstain. But if they welcome you and there's nothing connected to idolatry, he says eat it. Because if you don't, you'll be giving offense to them and also to the church of God. You will bring the church in disrepute. These people are elitists and exclusivists, and they think they're better than people because they don't eat certain things or whatever, like a lot of people do today. So Paul is setting out the principle of love and edification here. Hospitableness, common courtesy, respect for other people and their cultures and their dietary rules, etc. And you ought to be flexible where that is concerned. And then he says in verse 33, just as I please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, so that they may be saved. So Paul says, and you could read 1 Corinthians chapter 9, where he says, he became all things to all men. When he's among Jews under the law, he do the things under the law. And so he would abstain from certain foods. He would keep the Sabbath and all of these things. But when he's among Gentiles who don't have the law, he became like them outside of the law. So he would eat pork or whatever they give. He wouldn't keep any Sabbath. He wouldn't keep any all this. These are ritualistic stuff. And he's doing all of this to seek to be a cosmopolitan, to make himself at home everywhere he is, to win the love and affection of those he seek to minister to so that he could save them. This is what the gospel is about. It's adaptable regarding these dietary issues. Again, people who don't eat together, they will not become friends. When you disrespect a person's diet or food choice, they're not going to want to hear what you have to say. It's a big disrespect to diss what they eat, what they consume. And so Paul says, it's the same thing I do everywhere I go. So the rule he's laying down is not hypocritically telling you one thing and doing another. He says, hey, this is what I practice. You practice the same, and you will indeed save a lot of people, or have the opportunity to minister to a lot in doing so. So as I bring this study to a close this evening regarding foods in 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, we see clearly that food sacrificed to idols, again, it was whether clean or unclean food, it don't matter. Gentiles sacrifice everything to their pagan deities. And the apostle lays out principles under inspiration as to how we ought to relate to these things, as to how we ought to relate to individuals. You can buy anything in the meat market. All foods are clean. They don't commend you to God. They will not disapprove you before God. Your spirituality is not affected or determined by the food you eat. God does not look upon you with scorn or disgrace, or he's about to lick you down with a lightning bolt because you choose to have, some bacon or shrimp or whatever. Those things do not commend us, nor disapprove of us before God. And when people invite us by them, we are free to eat whatever they offer. If they say, however, this is in worship of an idol, then we must not eat to prick their conscience and to use that as an entering wedge so that we can minister to them. And whatever we eat or drink, whether to have or to abstain, Paul says we ought to ensure that we do it to God's glory, and we must be considerate in our conducts, our lifestyle, so that we may seek to save people and to bring them to the knowledge of the true and living God in that process. So these two passages, while they focus mostly on food sacrificed to idols, they also include the clean and unclean designations of the Old Testament, because like I said, Gentiles were not punctilious Jews who only offered clean animals to their idols. They offered both clean and unclean animals to their idols. And you can do your historical research, or I can put additional information after the study for you, and you can read those for yourselves to see that the instruction the apostle gave is to eat whatever that was sold in the market. Eat whatever is set before you. Eat whatever you would bought from the slaughterhouse after it's sacrificed to idol or whatever, because these things just don't matter. The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, and these things don't affect or determine your salvation, nor affect your moral standing or your character or personality. These things just go in the belly, go through the alimentary canal, and they are eliminated, and we are back hungry again, needing more food, etc., to sustain the physical body. So I hope that you would have learned a lot from what I shared. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer them. And also, I hope that you are proud to do additional research on these issues for yourself. Don't just take what people have to say. Don't just let people dictate to you what to eat and what to drink, and to threaten you with hell and brimstone and the forfeiture of heaven because you choose to eat certain things, whether because it's your culture, whatever. I mean, I'm all mixed up. I'm Haitian, Bahamian, Jamaican. And of course, by growing up in the Bahamas, there's a strong American culture. And so there's a variety of foods I eat based on my culture. In Haiti, mostly what we have is griot. We are mostly known by that, which is pork and fried plantain. And it's a part of my culture. In the Bahamas, conch. Everywhere you go, there's conch, cracked conch, lobster, shrimp. And I love these foods. Jamaica is the same thing. You know, we love our jerk pork and jerk chicken and all of these various things. American bologna, ham and bacon and all of these things. And I enjoy these foods. But some people, based on your culture and what you're used to, based on their legalistic rules, will make you feel like, hey, if you don't give up these things, you're going to go to hell. You know, God is going to strike you down dead, or you won't be pleasing to Him. So I hope that this would have been liberating for you, and you would look more into these things, that these matters of what you eat and drink, it don't matter. It don't affect your salvation. It don't determine your standing with the Lord. It don't affect your intellect. It does not do that. And your faith in Christ should be strong enough to know that what you eat is based on personal conviction. It don't affect your spirituality. And at the same time, you must be mature to know that there might be some among your mates, especially if they express that, so as to not cause offense to them and to cause them to lose their way. But enjoy your liberty in Christ, but just ensure that that liberty don't cause the bondage and downfall of others. So I hope that you enjoyed the exposition on these two passages as we continue with this to eat or not to eat dietary rules study, and you would have learned a lot. We'll continue some other time with a few other passages, but do have a great evening, and I really appreciate your company. Share this video with your friends or whoever might be interested in topics like these. I upload the studies after I finish them on YouTube, so the previous 3 or 4 are actually on YouTube. So if you miss a previous passage, you can go on YouTube and just type up my name, Elce Thunder Lauriston, or to eat or not to eat, and those should come up, and you'll be able to look back over them, study back over the notes, look into what I say, and compare the facts for yourself, and then come to your own conclusion regarding these issues. So thank you for joining me, and I'm happy that you were able to spend the time with me.